Well, hello there, class. Welcome to lesson number 4. I'm super glad you're with us today. I'm going to talk about some really important topics today. Freedom and responsibility and control. These are more of the kind of big picture topics, not so much the everyday practical nitty-gritty, but more of what does it mean to be a parent? How do we parent? What are some of the important things that go into our parenting? Those are the things we're going to talk about today. Now, we're going to look at kind of how things work out over the course of your child's life. So we're going to use this graph that you see in front of you there. I'm going to explain a little bit about how this graph is set up because we're going to look at several different topics as it plays out over the lifespan of your child. So first, here's your baby, age 0. So the bottom line there kind of covers the age span of your child. So there's the baby, there's the elementary age kid, there's what we maybe would call a tweenager, and then there's our 20-year-old. Kind of the goal of parenting is to raise a young adult ready to face life. So we'll be kind of looking at these pictures in our mind to kind of think about what needs to happen at these various ages. Now, on the vertical axis, we have the high levels of whatever the category is, and low levels. So as we graph out some different things, we're going to see highs and lows over time. So let's look at, just for the way of example, the topic of height. All right, if you were going to graph out what happens to your child over the course of their 20 years in terms of height, what would the graph look like? Well, obviously when babies are small, they're very short, right? And as they age, they get taller and taller. So our graph would kind of look like this. Now the line wouldn't keep going upward forever and ever because at some point, during the last part of those teenage years, it kind of levels off, right? So they don't just keep getting taller and taller until they die. It kind of levels off. So that's just kind of showing you how the graph works. Another graph we might do, just by way of practice here, is life skills. When our kids are real young, they don't have a lot of life skills yet, do they? Maybe only, you might say, 3 life skills: sucking and grasping and pooping. That might be the 3 life skills that they would have at age 0. But by the time they're 20, they're going to have a lot more life skills. It's going to look more like this, right? As we talked about last week, our life skills, we keep teaching them to our children. As they get older, they learn more life skills. And in fact, this line continues because it's not like life skills stop at age 20, right? They keep going. So I have a little arrow there to kind of show you that life skills keep being acquired. In fact, we all keep learning. You're never too old to learn. So that just kind of shows you how we're going to use these graphs on different really important topics. The first one we're going to talk about is freedom. Okay, the freedom that our kids have. We need to think about how much freedom they should have. What's a healthy amount of freedom over the course of the parenting years? So we're going to focus on year 20. So I'm going to kind of circle that just to kind of remind us that we're just using the number 20 just as a rule of thumb, representing the age at which our kids leave the home. Now, for most kids, that's age 20. There'll be some kids who are developmentally maybe slower, and maybe some special needs kids. Maybe they're not going to be ready to leave our home at age 20. So none of this is really going to apply in those cases. But for most kids, let's just think in terms of age 20 as being kind of the releasing age for them. Okay, so freedom. Now, when they get to be 20, this is what they look like, right? They're probably singing, free at last, thank God Almighty, I'm free at last, right? So the reality is that our kids are going to grow up and they're going to have a lot of freedom. They're going to be out of our house on their own, and they can pretty much do whatever they want. So this is just, I want you to think about this picture because this is going to be your kids one day. And what are they going to be like on that day? That's the question. Now think about all the areas that they're going to have freedom over when they leave your home. All right, we're going to make a big list over here. First of all, let's think about curfew, right? You might have a curfew right now for your kids, be home by 11 or something. But when they're off on their own, they will have complete freedom over their schedule. When they come in, they can stay out all night if they want. They can sleep at a friend's house. They're going to have complete freedom at age 20 to do whatever they want. There won't be a curfew. What about sleep? We're not going to be able to tell them, oh, go to sleep, just get enough sleep, go to bed. They're going to have complete freedom over how much sleep they get. They can pull all-nighters if they want. They can sleep. They can take naps or not. It's up to them completely. What about eating? Our kids at age 20 are going to be completely in charge of what they eat. They can eat junk food if they want. They can eat fast food. They can eat ramen noodles all day. They can eat fruits and vegetables. It'll be up to them completely to be free over their eating habits. What about studies? They're going to be completely in charge of their own studies. They can pull all-nighters and cram for tests. They can skip classes if they want. They will have complete freedom over their education. It won't be anything to do with us. Healthcare, same thing. If they want to go to the doctor or not go to the doctor or take medicines or they're going to be completely in charge of their life when it comes to healthcare. Same with church attendance, right? If they want to go to church, they can go to church. If they want to sleep in on Sundays, they can sleep in on Sundays. It'll be up to them to decide if they read their Bible, if they go to Bible studies. They'll be completely free to do whatever they want to when it comes to church attendance. And hygiene. If they want to take baths, if they want to wear deodorant, if they want to brush their teeth, these are things they will be completely in charge of. Laundry, they can do laundry once a week, once a month, never. They can just buy new clothes if they want, if they can afford it. Their laundry will be completely within their area of freedom to do. Same thing with friends. They can choose whatever friends they want. It won't matter if we like their friends or not. They're going to be completely free to choose their friends. Social life, what they do on the weekends, up to them. Complete freedom. Entertainment, what they watch, what kind of movies they watch, music, video games, how they spend their social time, it's going to be up to them. Money, they can live from paycheck to paycheck. They can save money. They can waste money if they even have money. They can get a job. They can get fired from a job. They're completely free to handle their own finances. Transportation, they can get from point A to point B. That's going to be their freedom to do. They can get there however they want. And substance use. So all of these things, our kids are going to have all this freedom to run their lives as they see fit. That's a lot. That's a big list of things for them to have to figure out. So here's the thing, right? Most kids have a lot of freedom, right? So we'll put the X way up here at the high level at age 20. They really have almost absolute freedom over these areas. Now, this is what happens normally, though, or oftentimes in our homes. And this is something I want you to really think about. In many homes, the kids are given very, very little freedom over time. They don't really get much say in things. They don't get to make too many choices. The parents are making a lot of the choices. And so their freedom level is really, really low for a long, long time. And all of a sudden, it's time to leave home. And then their freedom jumps up instantly to a high level. So is that a good graph? Is that a good idea? No, because here's what happens when kids have no freedom, no freedom, no freedom, no freedom, lots of freedom. This is what happens when they go off into life, right? All of a sudden they have absolute freedom. They can do what they want. Mom and dad are not looking over their shoulder. There's no accountability. They have complete freedom. And so a lot of kids get to college, and this is why we have binge drinking. This is why we have beer pong. I don't know what that guy in the middle is doing there, flying over the table. Kids falling asleep during classes, getting body piercing, all kinds of things, right? All of a sudden they have absolute freedom, but they don't know how to handle it. So that's not a good plan. That is just, this graph represents poor parenting. we have not prepared our kids to use freedom. We just all of a sudden give it to them, and it doesn't end well. Wouldn't it be better if we could give our kids freedom a little bit more gradually? Let's get rid of that old plan, and let's figure out how to give them freedom gradually, like this. Wouldn't this be a better graph? I mean, wouldn't you rather have your kids practicing their use of freedom, while they're still in your home, instead of waiting until they're off the radar and when you can't see all the blunders they're getting into? If they get freedom while they're still in the home, little by little, doling it out more and more, then we can help them processing their choices. We can observe their choices. We can help them process them. But this would be a much, much better graph. Now, of course, kids, if you ask them how much freedom would they like, well, they're going to say this. They want all the freedom, right? They love freedom. Everybody likes freedom. But when it comes to responsibility, if you ask them how much responsibility do you want, it's going to look like that, right? It's going to be low. They want low amounts of responsibility. But that's just not the way life works. I mean, that would be nice if you could have all this freedom and no responsibility. Like, I would love that. Like, everybody would love that, right? That's not the world we live in. One of the important life lessons that we need to teach our kids is this, that the more responsibility they show, the more freedom they're going to get. That's the way life works. So here would be a better graph of how freedom and responsibility play out. It's not going to be exactly a straight line because their freedom is always purchased by showing responsibility. So, as parents, we need to give our kids greater and greater amounts of responsibility in exchange for added freedom. I'll give you a few examples from my house. For example, if our kids wanted the freedom to own their very own pet, and that's kind of a nice freedom, right, to own your own pet. Well, they first had to show that they were responsible to take care of a pet with no adult help whatsoever. So our kids, when they were young, they had real small pets, disposable pets, to practice pet ownership. But as they got older, if they wanted, they could show that they had, shown responsibility with a goldfish. Well, now maybe they could get a guinea pig. And if they showed responsibility to take care of a guinea pig, well, then maybe they could get something more substantial, like a cat. Our daughter, when she was 8 years old, decided she wanted a cat. Well, she had proven from her past track record that she could take care of a pet. And so Lexi had a cat for the next 10 years. So that's a good example of increasing freedom in conjunction with responsibility. Or another example is, say that your kid wants the freedom to own an American Girl doll. Well, those things are pretty expensive, ridiculously expensive, by the way. But if they wanted to own an American Girl doll, they had to first show responsibility by saving allowance money or birthday money for a long time. With that responsibility of saving money, then you can be awarded the freedom of having something that's nice, like an American Girl doll. One of the phrases that I really love, it's "Don't bite the hand that feeds you." We'll be talking about that phrase, I'm sure, in future lessons. Don't bite the hand that feeds you. This is a principle of life that's super important for our kids to learn. So if you want the freedom of being well fed, then you must first show responsibility by not disrespecting the hand that feeds you. It just makes sense. It's the way life works. So kids who respect their parents, they're going to get more privileges. They're going to get more freedoms. Kids who disrespect their parents are going to find their freedoms are going to be diminished. Kids who show irresponsibility, like not following rules such as, being home at dusk, they're going to lose the freedom to go out unsupervised, at least for a while. So this chart here is really important to think about with our kids. We want to give them more freedom, but we also need to give them more responsibility. And they need to see that those two things go together. All right, that's enough about freedom. Let's look at a different topic now. Let's look at the topic of parental control. it's related to freedom, but looking at it through a different lens. Now, how should parental control change over the course of 20 years? We're focusing on year 20, so let me highlight that, right? So this is end of the line. This is when kids are ready to leave our home. And let's think too about that list of all these things, right? These are the areas that our kids are going to have control over. They're going to have freedom over. Those are kind of the same thing, by the way, freedom and control. Well, there's that list. These are things that at age 20, we're no longer in control of those things, right? So our control will be very low on that day over all of these areas. Now, I don't put the X at the very bottom on the line. We always will have some control over our kids. For example, if we're helping them pay for college, that gives us a certain measure of control. Or if they're in our will, for example, we get a little bit of say in their lives, a little bit of control, but it's going to be low, especially compared to how much control they have. There's how much control they have on that day, day one of year 20. So recognizing that our control is going to be low. Now, this is how you would expect an ideal graph would look, right? So it seems that our control ought to drop so that before they leave our house, we're no longer controlling them. Instead, they're controlling themselves, right? They're exercising a lot of freedom and control over their own lives. So that's just a reality that this is the way it should look. However, I've noticed that this isn't typical in a lot of families. I was a youth pastor for a number of years, and even though this is perhaps the ideal graph to describe parental control dropping, a lot of the parents, they do this. They keep a high level of control over their kids until the kids leave home, at which time they suddenly release all control. Kind of like that graph we saw earlier of freedom, right? Where the kids have no freedom, then a lot of freedom. Well, this is kind of looking at it from a different perspective. A lot of control, a lot of control, a lot of control, a lot of control, no control. Right? These kids have never learned how to control themselves. And so what do we get with the scenario like this? That's what we get, right? That same picture of kids who had all this control, and now the control has been lifted. The sanctions are suddenly lifted, and this is what we end up with. So not a good plan. So this strategy of maintaining a lot of control, that's a terrible strategy. All right, let's get rid of that right there. And let's go back to our ideal design right here, the descending line, where our control drops little by little as the kids get ready to leave our home. But, I mentioned I was a youth pastor, and I saw an interesting trend. Instead of this, some parents actually reverse things, and they actually start increasing their level of control, especially during those teenage years. They start to increase control. You've probably seen this too. I think it's pretty typical where parents start to get a little controlling during those teen years. Now, how would you expect that this goes over? Like if you were in that home and parents started increasing control, what's it going to look like? I think it's going to look like this. There it is, right? It's going to be a tug of war. There's going to be a lot of parent-teen conflict over this matter of who's in control. The kids want less control from the parents. They want more control of their own. They want freedom. And the parents, however, are now demanding more control, trying to pull that line upward into a more controlling kind of a scenario. There's going to be battle zones going on in a house like this. Now, what would make parents raise the level of control. Like maybe they were doing a good job of releasing control, but all of a sudden something changed and they started increasing control over their kids. What's going on? I think a couple of things are going on. One is fear, right? These parents are starting to get fearful, which is making them control. Parents know that we live in a hostile world. It is a hostile world, no question about that, right? Our kids are immersed in a destructive culture that would tempt them to behave foolishly and would hurt themselves. So we're afraid our kids are going to get hurt. There are dangers lurking everywhere, right? You can name them, right? We could think of, if you were sitting here, we would be brainstorming all the dangers like drugs and alcohol and sex and pot and vaping and porn and gangs and violence and unplanned pregnancies, addictions, etc., 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 right? There's lots of toxic things that our kids could get caught up in. In fact, the Bible goes along with this. The Bible says that Satan roams about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he can devour. The last thing we want is for our kids to get devoured by Satan and his tactics. So it's no wonder that parents are afraid that our kids might get caught in a trap. It's no wonder that parents would want to up the control level, right? Now, another reason I think why parents tend to do this is knowledge. Parents just know too much, right? Perhaps we remember what we ourselves were like at their age. We remember maybe the mistakes we made or the traps that we fell in. And so we know firsthand what's possible for our kids. Maybe we want to spare them from those mistakes. And we love our kids. We don't want them to be hurt. We don't want them to flounder and get hurt. We know all too well our kids' weaknesses. That's another area of knowledge. We know what our kids tend to do. We know what they're tempted to do. We know what their friends are into. There's just a lot of things that are concerns because we know too much. And so that tempts us to raise the level of control. We also might know, if we look at science, we know that a teen's brain is really not fully functioning. It's not fully developed until after those teen years. So we know that our kids are in this hostile world, and they don't have really a well-developed brain to help them. So that knowledge, again, makes us want to increase our control over our kids. All of these are valid concerns. These are loving parents that want nothing but the best for their kids. But because of those fears and all that knowledge, they're upping their level of control. Now let's think about this from the kids' perspective. Okay, what's going on with these kids? How are they responding to this increase of control? Well, I think there's really two different responses depending on the temperament of your kid. One, some kids will respond with resentment. Now, they might go along with the controls, they might put up with it, but they're resentful. They're inwardly, they might be rebelling, or they might be obeying on the outside, but on the inside, they're resentful. They look at their parents as being overly controlling, as being not understanding, they don't care about me. And so there's a resentment that happens between these parents and these kids. Now with other kids, it's not resentment, but it might actually be rebellion. Like the kids who are strong-willed, like they might actually be doing the bad behaviors and just being more sneaky about it. They might be sneaking out at night doing the same things, just off the radar so parents can't tell what's going on. They might become deceptive. They might start lying. They might start doing things behind their parents' backs so they can get their way. Either way, this is just not a good, happy home, right? This is not really what we want. It seems like there's really no good solution, though. If we keep control high, which is what, as parents, we kind of want to do, our kids might end up being resentful or rebellious, and that would not be a great outcome. On the other hand, though, if we lower the control, our kids might actually fall into one of these traps. It could ruin their life. There's all kinds of things at stake. So it seems like there's really no solution. This just seems like a lose-lose proposition. All these things, who's going to manage these things? Who's going to make sure they're making good decisions? Who's going to help them navigate through all of these areas of life? It's very scary. It's a scary time. Well, there is hope. And the first thing, though, we have to do is stop putting our faith in control. Control needs to drop. Again, we're talking about developmentally normal kids here. These are the kids that could leave home at age 20, right? Some of you have kids that's not a possibility. They might be living in your home for a lot longer than that. But for most average kids, age 20 is the day of separation. Our control needs to drop gradually in time. But instead of relying on control, which we have to let go of, I'm going to suggest that there's something that's even more powerful in helping our kids live wisely. And that is this. Here it is. Ready? Influence. That is the key right there. Parental influence. This is going to be an important part of the rest of this course for the weeks to come. What if we could figure out how to influence our kids at the very same time that we're decreasing our control over them? Wouldn't it be great if we could influence our kids' choices without having to limit a lot of their freedoms or asserting our control over them? What if we could figure out how to influence our kids? Don't you think there would be a lot less of those tug-of-wars going on in our homes? Now notice on the influence line there's a green arrow that points to the right because it's ongoing. Our influence really doesn't have to stop at age 20. Wouldn't it be great if our influence could affect our kids' well-being for the rest of their lives? We would always have some position of influence over the wise choices that they make. That's the kind of parent I want to be, a parent of influence. My control is going to come to an end, but I want to be influential in my kids' lives. So those are some of the goals that this class is going to hope to achieve, giving you tools to help you be highly influential in your kids' lives. Over the coming weeks, we're going to look at lots of ways to increase your influence on your kids without having to focus so much on control. We'll talk about influence enhancers, such as modeling good behavior yourself, verbalizing your values, cultivating trust with your kids, building positive relationships, giving them adult responsibilities. These are the things that we're going to explore in the weeks ahead, and I'm excited about that journey. Well, that's really it for today's lesson. It's been a little bit of a longer lesson, but I think these are important topics that you need to understand. Freedom, responsibility, control, and influence. Hopefully today I gave you some new ways to view parenting over these next 20 years.